Sign up to Council's disaster and weather event warning system. Receive alerts about emergency news, severe weather events and other public safety alerts via SMS or email. Registering to the disaster messaging system is free. To register, visit Gladstone Regional Council's Region Watch website and click on the Register for Warnings button. Get ready, Gladstone. Take the steps to protect what's most important to you. Let's be better prepared and protected for emergencies and disasters.
Well, good morning. The time being 9 a.m, I declare open the general meeting for the Gladstone Regional Council for the 19th of September 2023. The first item on the agenda is our apologies, and we have received an apology from Councillor Muscat. Can I have a mover that that apology be accepted? Thank you, Councillor Goodluck. Seconded, Councillor Cameron. All in favour? The motion is carried. We also have Councillor Branthwaite, who is joining us online. Thank you, Councillor Branthwaite. Councillors, the next item on the agenda is our messages of condolence. Do we have any messages of condolence this morning? No messages of condolence. The next item on the agenda is the prior notifications of conflicts of interest, and we have a conflict that needs to be resolved. Thank you, Councillor Hanson.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I, Councillor Rick Hanson, would like to declare that I have a declarable conflict of interest in a recent topic of discussion at a councillor information session regarding the expressions of interest for Park Street, as I am a member of the Committee of the Gladstone Health Education Pathways Working Group, which has expressed interest in the Park Street expression of interest. While this matter is not a part of today's agenda, as a result of this declarable conflict of interest, I will leave the room and will not participate in any future decisions relating to the Park Street EOI and the Committee for the Gladstone Health Education Pathways Working Group.
Thank you, Councillor Hanson. As Councillor Hanson has opted to leave the room when that is on the agenda, there's no resolution required from Council. Is there any further conflicts of interest need to be registered, councillors? No? Okay, thank you, councillors. The next item on the agenda is the Mayor's statement, and I would like to start by acknowledging the amazing events that we had on the Gladstone region in the last few weeks. Obviously, the first and one of the biggest was PopCon, and I must congratulate Councillor Muscat and others who said this would be a huge event, and it absolutely was. There was thousands of people in the main street of Gladstone enjoying the pop culture event put on by our team at the Gladstone Entertainment Convention Centre. And I note Kylie Lee online. If you can pass on our congratulations and thanks to all involved. It was a huge success. And the same weekend, of course, in the Boyne Valley, we had the Boyne Valley Showcase, another big success, and congratulations to all the volunteers who put that event on in Nagurun, but also at Yabobo. It was a great event for the Boyne Valley. We had Welcome Week in the Gladstone region and right across the country, but celebrated and wrapped up with a welcome morning tea, the first of many, at the Phillip Street Communities Precinct. So again, to Kylie and Bri and the team at Phillip Street, and all the volunteer groups, all the groups that come together, that volunteered their time on a Saturday morning to be there at Phillip Street to show our new citizens or our new residents exactly what we have to offer in the Gladstone region, particularly around social services, community services, and just an amazing community morning. Great to see so many new Gladstone residents getting the chance to catch up. And the Baffle Creek community did a very similar welcome function on the Saturday at the Sport and Rec grounds as well. Speaking of new citizens, on Sunday, just gone, we welcomed 25 new citizens as part of Citizenship Day at the Gladstone Entertainment Convention Centre. So, well, welcome to our new Gladstone region citizens. And also on Saturday, as Under the Trees, Friday and Saturday night, Under the Trees event at Boyne Island. It was a huge weekend. There was a Speedway on as well. Over 1,400 people had pre-purchased tickets to the Speedway, and it was a big event at the Under the Trees festival. So to Gladstone and Maxine and the hundreds of volunteers that are involved in putting on the Under the Trees festival, well done, and looking forward to that event happening again next year. And later that night, I was able to be at the football grand finals, the soccer grand finals, depending on who you talk to watch Clinton win both the men's and women's Central Coast football grand finals. So congratulations to Clinton. Central won an earlier grade, and Clinton did win one of the younger grades as well. So very great day for football in the Gladstone region, claiming most of the trophies for soccer. Upcoming events, we already have the Baffle Creek Family Fishing Festival underway at Baffle Creek right now. They have the midweek sort of barbecue on Wednesday night, and then the big family fun day at the sports grounds on Saturday, so make sure you get there for that. Shout out to the Heart of the Agnes group, who have got the Moby-Mat launch at Main Beach this weekend as well. I've got to give them a big round of applause. They were in here just recently speaking to council. They were offered the opportunity to have council support and industry support, and they've gone and raised the funds themselves, and I think well done to them. And I asked Byron why they did that, why they didn't accept help from others, and they wanted to raise the funds in their community and show this was a community project. So well done to the team there. That's going to be a fantastic addition to the Agnes Main Beach. The Gladstone Engineering Alliance conference is on the 27th and 28th. It will be absolutely packed. I see Lisa Dowling, our CEO, was one of the guest speakers as well. So a whole huge lineup of guest speakers for that major industry conference, and billions of reasons to attend, with so much new industry investing in the Gladstone region, and our existing industries reinvesting in our region as well. National Police Remembrance Day is on Friday the 29th of September. I believe Councillor Churchill will be representing us at that as well. The Calliope Rodeo on the same weekend, Friday and the 29th and Saturday the 30th, one of the biggest and best events in Calliope for the year. Don't you worry about that. And then back in 1770, Agnes Water, we have the 1770 Cultural Connections Immersion Festival on Saturday the 30th and Sunday the 1st of October. That's just some of the events happening in the Gladstone region, but pretty excited to see, and thank you Councillor Grady for snapping that photo this morning, the lights at Dron and Drive finally going up, and that is going to be a much safer intersection. Thank you, councillors. That's the Mayor's statement on current issues. The next item on the agenda is the confirmation of the minutes. G2.1 is the confirmation of the general meeting minutes for the 15th of August 2023. Move Councillor Churchill, seconded Councillor Hanson. Any business arising? Put the motion. All in favour. Thank you, councillors. Oh, sorry, can I say that again? There we go. Thank you, councillors. The next item is our deputation, and I'd like to welcome Steve Enders, who's sitting a little bit further back today, but we're including him in the deputation just in case there's questions, councillors. Sarah Hunt, Fred Feather, and we got Brad Comley online, I'm hoping. Not yet. Okay. We're trying to log him in. I wonder what Rachel was walking around before. I thought I'd said something wrong. Okay, well, Rach tries and connects Brad in. We might throw straight to you, Sarah, if you can lead this way. And of course, councillors, if we do have questions, we might hold them till the end, and then you can ask those questions of Steve, Sarah, and Fred, and also Brad if he can get online at the time. Over to you, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having us today. Before we get started, I might do a show of hands from the gallery just so the councillors can see who's here from the Agnes Water region. If you're one of the builders in the Gladstone area, can you please raise your hand? If you're a homeowner going through the struggle, can you please raise your hand? If you're a real estate agent from the Gladstone region, can you please raise your hand? Thank you very much. So we've got a nice mixture of people in attendance today just to show council the scope of this issue, and now we'll get started. So the Gladstone Regional Council Planning Scheme has their flood hazard overlay. It's been in effect since 2015 when the planning scheme came into force. As part of that flood hazard overlay, there is an investigation area which spans the entirety of Agnes, almost from the areas hatched in red, the Agnes Creek catchment up to 1770 Headland, and out to the west through the Round Hill Creek adjoining properties. This mapping is based on the state planning policies mapping for Queensland floodplains, and it was required to be included in council's planning scheme by the state government. So that's where that comes from. The purpose of the Flood Hazard Overlay Code is to ensure that development on land subject to a defined flood event avoids or mitigates the risk of flood hazard to protect people, property and the environment. Unfortunately, the flood hazard investigation area doesn't have a defined flood level because it is an investigation area only. The intent, from my understanding, is that at some point after the adoption of the planning scheme in 2015, council was to ground truth this through actual flood studies for Agnes Creek and Round Hill Creek. In the table of assessment for the Flood Hazard Overlay Code, dwelling houses get called up if they're built within a flood hazard investigation area and there's no adopted flood study done, or a site-specific flood hazard assessment hasn't been completed. So it can potentially be accepted development subject to requirements, allowing homeowners to go straight to the building process and not clog up your planning department. Previously, councils used their discretion as per the bottom box to say that we don't believe this area floods. And this has been done through a number of exemption certificates that homeowners have applied to council. They've put in a copy of their proposed dwelling house plans. Council has done an internal review through the planning department, and our understanding is the engineers have also had a look at the plans provided, and these exemption certificates have been issued to say that, you know, these houses aren't affected by the flood hazard overlay. So that's where we previously were up until the beginning of this year. Council's current policy position has changed following what we understand is an internal review and audit of your risk process. That's what we've been advised from your planning department. And whilst we understand that council can't continue to take on risk that is unfounded or potentially not ground truthed, no actual consultation or advice to the building and development industry was given when this policy position change occurred earlier this year. So the industry is now flying blind, or previously flying blind, on how to proceed with this change. Since receiving this advice that development applications or dwelling houses would have to do a full flood hazard assessment in accordance with Council's flood policy, which I'm not sure if you can read it from that far away. There's quite a number of items that Council now requires to be addressed, when previously they were just issuing exemption certificates. When the issue first arose, engineers, our PEQ certified engineers, were quoting around $500 to say, yep, we're willing to certify that these building sites do not flood. The introduction of this position regarding the flood hazard policy has now introduced an additional cost anywhere between $15,000 to $30,000 per homeowner to have a flood hazard assessment drawn up to address all of the items within this guideline. I'd like to stress at this point that this policy is a guideline only, and at no point in the Flood Hazard Overlay Code does it say it's mandatory for a flood hazard assessment to be drafted in accordance with this guideline. Alright, Fred's going to run through some of the impacts that this is actually having on the building and development industry in Agnes, along with homeowners.
Yep. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So we're here today to represent the people from Agnes Water who are suffering from this flood study that's required. They are builders, owners, developers, contractors, building designers and engineers. These people here are supporting probably another 200 trades at Agnes that they're looking after. Most of them are sort of in the wind-down mode at the moment because we've got 20 applications sitting there waiting for a decision on this flood study. We've done a cost of that work. It's around about $15 million worth of houses sitting there, plus the cost of land is another $5 million. They're paying interest on that loan, and that's been for the last 2 months. So that adds up a lot of money. Material costs are rising, and some of these people are paying rents while this decision's hanging out there. So Sarah's mentioned the flood reports at $30,000 each. So if you've got 20 houses at $30,000, that comes up to $600,000. The real estates are having problems because land values are dropping. People bought blocks of land and they can't wait around for this decision. They're paying interest on this loan, and they just want to get out of it and get out of town. So there's quite a few things there that these builders have just waiting for things to happen out there. At the moment, council is assessing some of these reports that we put forward, and they're more or less saying they won't assess the flood report. They're leaving it up to the private certifier. So we're sort of at what risk are we at with signing off flood study report? So really need council to come up with a defined flood level so that we can start approving with confidence building approvals. Basically, there seem to be a couple of items there with overland flooding coming from new houses going online, stormwater overland. I think we're just making a proposal that if that's causing a problem with new homes, we could probably put in rainwater tanks and rubble drains to stop the overland stormwater going into the existing drainage system. So that's about it.
That's about it? Okay.
Thanks very much.
In addition to what Fred's talked about, there's massive delays in the approval process because of this uncertainty. Council's own building certifier is unwilling to sign off on dwelling houses in the Agnes region until this flood hazard issue is resolved. As a result, there's been termination of contracts, additional build costs, loss of income and job security for our Agnes water builders, further pressure on an already strained housing market, and a growing perceived anti-development mindset in the Agnes water region, which is the opposite of what we want for urban growth. I've got a case example here of Beaches Village Circuit, which is to the north of the Agnes Water Township. Within the life of this planning scheme, councils approved over 50 lots in this area, and some of which have already come online. Out of those lots, each application that was lodged addressed the flood hazard overlay code during the assessment of the subdivision application. At no point did council raise that there was a flooding issue in this area. So you've brought on over 50 lots without addressing any major issue with flooding. Now, homeowners that have bought these new lots are trying to build their houses and being hit with the requirement to do a full flood hazard assessment in accordance with council's policy, which is valued at $15,000 to $30,000 per lot. So my question is, how can council approve that many lots in a flood hazard area without addressing flood risk if there was one? And our understanding from the assessment process, because Zone was involved in those applications, was that it went through due process. Your engineers reviewed the application as they are required to and approved it without any deemed risk of flooding. So that's one case, and we have 2 clients at a minimum in this area who have been held up for the past 2 to 3 months from being able to build their houses because of this issue. Another one, and Brad Comley, who is a flood hazard engineer, will be talking a bit more about this one, is going to talk next. 212 Ocean Beach Drive, it's in the Sandcastles estate from my understanding. The owner was told to lodge an exemption certificate, given the previous exemption certificate had lapsed. Once she lodged that request, it was refused. She was then told to lodge an MCU because it's simple. That's actually a $5,000 cost exercise, if not more, once you've got your planning consultant fees and your draftsman fees to go with that. She received an action notice for failure to provide a flood study and a response to all the codes. She then engaged Byam Consulting for an additional fee of $5,000. Now, Byam has kindly reduced their overall fee. If this was a standalone flood hazard, it would be up near that $15,000. But because of the sheer level of reporting required for the Agnes region, Byam has considered to reduce their fees. That material was lodged late August. The detailed flood study by the RPQ flood engineer has been outlined as insufficient. We received a RFI asking for further detail. And since the beginning of this process, the cost of her construction has increased approximately $300,000. So as I said, Brad Conley's written a report for that site. He is from Biome Water and Environmental Consulting, and he's a full RPQ certified engineer specialising in flooding. So if we can transfer over to Brad online, that would be great.
Hello, councillors and everyone in the room. Is everyone okay to hear me okay? That's the first thing? Yep, great. Okay. Look, Zone have asked me to just run a little bit of everyone through what we've done in response to this single dwelling at in Agnes Waters. The subject site's located there in. I'll share my screen actually. Sorry, apologise for that. If you could just let me know that you can see a site plan on the screen, that would be great.
Not yet, but they can. Those online can see it, but not in the boardroom. So Rachel's fixing that for us.
All right. Look, I'll keep going a little bit, and hopefully the boardroom will catch up. It's probably important that you do see what I'm showing you, so that'd be great if you can acknowledge that.
Yeah, we can see that.
You can. Got that? Okay. So yeah, my name's Brad Comley, a small environmental hydraulic company down here on the Gold Coast. We do stuff with Zone down this way and a lot up north more recently. We've been made aware of the issue that of Agnes Waters has just been pointed out to you. So we're engaged to look at trying to do a flood assessment to demonstrate whether or not the allotment was flooded or not flooded. And then the main sort of outcome of our report was to provide a finished floor level for the building that we believed met the flood overlay code requirements and also the coastal erosion overlay code requirements, and provided a dwelling house that was immune to either flooding from riverine or flooding from storm surging and coastal sea level rise. So I've been asked to just quickly go through what our report looks like and how we go about that. And any questions, I suppose, in that process, happy to answer. So obviously there's the site there. What we do is we've actually defined a catchment area that contributes to rainfall in that area and therefore flooding. it's a matter of just defining that edge of the catchment. The modelling package we use nowadays is called two-flow, and you can use a process called a rain on grid model with some fairly fine grid inputs. And once you define that catchment, you then just define a rainfall to put over the top of that catchment. And in theory, it mimics rainfall over that area. So we then have to find what rainfall to actually put over that catchment that would generate the highest sort of flood level for different flood events. And to give you an understanding of the sort of computing that we need to do, we're looking at 10 different durations. If you can see there, different storm events have different durations. We multiply that by 10 different temporal patterns to get 110 storms per event. And there's around about 6 events that we're asked to look at, which is anything from the lower events, which is the Q5, Q2, Q5, Q10, Q20, all the way up to Q100. And then more recently, we're being asked to look at the Q200 and also the PMF. So it ends up with 660 rainfall events that we apply over this catchment to work out the worst case sort of flooding to define that building level. We've also got to put in some parameters with regards to the tailwater. Because this is an area that's close to the coast, we need to take into consideration what the ocean is doing at the time of the rainfall event. So we end up looking at HAT, which is highest astronomical tide, and then we need to add some climate change provisions to both the tailwater and the rainfall. In terms of the tailwater, we add about 800 mils for sea level rise. And in terms of rainfall, we add 20% extra rainfall than what that we have in our temporal patterns. So we're accounting for climate change as part of this process. We then nominate different sort of roughness factors across the catchment to give an idea of how that rain then runs through different parts of the catchment, whether it's a rough forest or a smooth road, for instance. And then we end up putting in as much pipe network that we need to that's sort of relevant to the site that we're looking at, and we normally get that from council data. Otherwise, it's all surface flow, but we put the pipes in as well. And then we end up generating a model event and a depth of flooding across a particular area for the event. This here is a representation of the flood depths across that Agnes region for the 1% AEP, with 20% extra rainfall for climate change and a tailwater with HAT plus 0.8. We then are able to, from that information, and I'll just go to this little slide here, so that's the 1% AEP generating a water level within the creek or the river that takes into consider climate change. We added 1 metre of freeboard, which is another provision of safety, I suppose, and that gives us a finished floor level recommendation based on flooding for a house. In this particular instance, the the ground level of the house was at 5.6 to 5.8, and our highest flood level in the 1% AEP plus 1 metre of freeboard was 4.65. So it's sort of showing you that the house at the very lowest point's nearly a metre higher than the predicted flood level that we've got for the 1% AEP. The code also, though, has a requirement to address storm surge, which would normally occur during a cyclone, where you get winds pushing a fetch across the ocean, pushing up the ocean levels and potentially causing flooding that way. So we've got to have a look at that as well. Now, what that is more of a mathematical equation rather than all the flood modelling. We just take HAT plus sea level rise. We add 2 metres to that to count for storm side inundation, and then another metre of freeboard. And we got to a level of 5.55 as being the level that we would need to set the house at to govern against storm surge, sort of ocean flooding, for want of a better term. You can see in this particular site, the ocean flooding is a lot higher than the riverine flooding. And so under the planning scheme, that becomes the defining level for the finished floor level of the house. And you can see in both instances the land area, the land surface as it is higher than both of those levels. So the house therefore is not flooded by riverine flooding and not flooded by storm surge. So in this instance, we finished the report with some more pictures and bits and pieces, and then we're able to sort of certify that if a house was set at a minimum level, we believed it would be compliant with both requirements of the Gladstone Council's flood code and coastal hazards overlay code. And we submitted that to council for, I suppose, endorsement or review. As was pointed out before, the current situation that we're in at the moment is we've received this information request back from council. It pretty much is a cut and paste out of the policy of what you're supposed to do to prepare a model. We've done most of these dot points here, and I've had a chat to the council officers about it. It seems to be that they're happy to support our report, provided we write the words that we certify the results of the report. I'm happy to do that. That's not a problem. What I suppose is a bit weird is we actually write that I'm an RPEQ and certify the report at the start of the report. Maybe the word approved needs to be changed to certified, but that's where we're at the moment. We're going to tidy this report up, write something about certification, send it back to council, and we're hoping that that will allow our client to get an approval for her dwelling.
Thanks, Brad. That makes a lot of sense now that... Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Goodluck. So.
Thank you for going through that, Brad. I guess I
Sorry,
wanted...
Sarah, if I can just ask a quick question of Brad before you move on.
Yep, no
Brad,
problem.
Thanks, mate, for that. With that report there, the high water mark there is 5.55. What time frame does that say that would be effective for? Is it just for this point in time, or is it for 20 years with the flood modelling? What sort of time frame does that sort of say that will be a suitable high water mark?
Well, in the case for that particular one, the 5.5, I suppose what that looks at is the sea level increase of 0.8, which is, I think, based on climate change predictions to the year 2100. Okay. And then it also has a storm surge element, which has got a element of time to it as well, I suppose. Simply to your question, I believe that that's fairly accurate to 2100 in terms of storm surge and climate change.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
No other questions? I wanted Brad to go through that process just to outline what an RPEQ engineer goes through to actually certify that a site doesn't flood. Now, Brad, what is the risk to an RPEQ certifier if they lie, essentially?
Yeah, you pretty much you get debarred or taken off the register. Yeah, we're held to a professional conduct, and you have to do everything within your power to be a professional engineer and act professionally. If you don't do that correctly, you will no longer be held that RPEQ certification with the board.
And you could be sued, right?
Yeah, if you do something that's not, if you don't do something that's accurate, I suppose, and within the current guidelines, or you go outside those guidelines, yeah, I assume a client could sue you for damages if you provided poor recommendations.
Thank you. All right. So we're here today to try and provide some alternative solutions to resolve this issue for the Agnes Water community and to provide certainty moving forward, knowing due well that you can't go back to the previous process of just issuing exemption certificates to say the site doesn't flood. So in our discussions with Tegan, thank you very much for your assistance. She's advised that the council has funding for the Agnes Creek catchment flood study and that will be occurring at some point within this financial year. On that basis, we request that this be expedited and done as a matter of priority so that it can be used within future assessments.
Can I ask straight on that, Brad, do you do blood studies for councils?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. And at this point, there is no funding for the Round Hill Creek catchment, which is slightly larger than the Agnes Creek catchment. But once again, we request that council do this as a matter of priority, knowing full well budgeting is an issue. But in having a holistic flood study done for both of those catchments, it provides a more accurate and certain flood level for the Agnes community moving forward. And it's done as one study with one level, and it's not done in a piecemeal fashion by homeowners one at a time. And each engineer will go through that process that Brad's just completed with you guys and potentially come up with different levels, because their flood modelling may be slightly different, or the way they do it may be slightly different. So this is the cleanest way to provide certainty for the Agnes Water region moving forward in terms of defined flood levels. So it's option number 1. And Steve and I have talked about potential cost recovery, and I have some notes here. Whilst this is something that should have been done in the past 8 years based on the life of the current planning scheme, if budgeting is an issue and council needs to look at a reasonable cost recovery exercise, there may be an opportunity, and I say this with caution, but future developers could pay to utilise the findings of that study moving forward. At a conservative level, if there's a demand for an additional 50 dwellings per year in the Agnes Water region based on our current needs studies, you could charge maybe $500 per house to utilise the findings of that flood study. 50 times 500 is $25,000 a year, and depending on the overall cost of your study, you could recoup or have a return on that investment within 2 to 4 years. So that is a potential option. Alternatively, each individual homeowner that wants to build in these areas is going to be looking anywhere between $5,000 to $30,000 to do a flood study.
Sarah, if I may just add to that, other councils have something similar where if they do have an adopted flood study, there's 2 ways of creating revenue. One is you can do a flood search to generate a level that's endorsed by council that is around about that money that Sarah said, $500, something like that. Alternatively, the other one is when you potentially are in a flood affected area and you're filling or something like that, you then have to have a look at the impact that you're creating so that you don't have worsening. In that instance, a consultant like ourselves would apply to council to have that model released to us. We would pay a fee on that and then use that model to assess the impact. So there's 2 ways of gaining revenue there, as just was pointed out.
Thanks, Brad. Option number 2, which is probably a more immediate effect, is the planning scheme allows council to use their discretion for development within a flood hazard investigation area. The QRA, Queensland Reconstructive Authority, has links to Queensland Government's flood check mapping. Now, I was hoping to take you on an interactive mapping journey today, but unfortunately the flood modelling has been taken offline. I'm not sure for how long, but I've just handed out a hard copy version that we believe this modelling on the screenshot is taken from. From my discussions with Brad, this mapping is based on a level 1 basin mapping under the Queensland Reconstructive Authority's Planning for Stronger, More Resilient Floodplains. The data set that I've just handed out to you in a hard copy, I'm sorry for the quality, is created through the Queensland Flood Mapping Program as a response to the Queensland Flood Commission of Inquiry. So that's where I believe this comes from. As you can see, the extent of flooding is much less than what the flood hazard investigation area currently covers. All of Beaches Village circuit to the north down to the promenade is actually shown as flood free. The Agnes Creek catchment still has some flood mapping over the top of it. So option 2 for council would be to allow for these lots located out of an affected flood area per this mapping to proceed without the requirement for a flood hazard assessment, because the QRA mapping at a Queensland government level, very high level 1 basin mapping, shows that those areas don't flood. So I'll just let you look at that a little bit longer, and I've also got a catchment from 1770 and also out west through the rural res catchments.
Sarah, when was that QRA mapping done?
That was interactive mapping available last week, but this flood basin I think is from 2012, and that's Q100 flood mapping. So that is option 2, to try and reduce the sheer volume of lots affected by the flood hazard investigation area. Rely on the Queensland Reconstructive Authority's mapping. And now, under the notation within Council's flood hazard overlay, it says a defined flood level is either set by Council or the level mapped by the Queensland Reconstruction Authority. So this is where we've sourced this flood check information, and could be a potential option to reduce the sheer number of lots affected by the flood hazard investigation area. In saying that, any lots still mapped as being flood affected would have to go through the flood hazard assessment process that Brad has just run you through.
Just to further that, the information that's on that website, as was just pointed out, was done to a level 1. The level that our sort of report that I ran you through there is pretty much a level 3, which is a lot higher than level 1, obviously. But just to give you context of what I presented to you for what you're looking at the moment.
Level 1's very high, like entire basin type flood mapping. And yeah, Brad's is a level 3, which is site specific, detailed, very ground truth and accurate. So, the other option, as Brad talked about, the coastal impacts of storm tide and the highest astronomical tide, storm surge. The CHAS has just recently been done and ground truth by Council. Storm tide level is approximately 5 metres AHD along the coastline, and the highest astronomical tide in the highest case is 7 metres. So lots within the northern precinct are measuring at 19 metres, anywhere between 13 to 19 metres AHD, just for context on height differences from affected areas. So if Council is willing to endorse that the QRA mapping shows you're not in a flood affected area and the CHAS shows you're not in a coastal affected area, do you need to go through the detailed process to demonstrate that your site doesn't flood, especially considering that those, specifically Beaches Village Circuit, have just recently been approved and addressed by Council that there is no flood. So that is option number 2. Any questions on that before I move forward?
Thanks, Sarah. The AHD, the Australian Height Datum, is that right?
Yeah.
Is it custom practice in other areas for Council to provide the AHD as the minimum height level for building, and that's what you use for approvals, or is that different?
So when you have a defined flood level, that's based on a Q100 flood event. My understanding, Brad, you can correct me if I'm wrong. And it's based on a certain AHD. So once you've got that flood level, you have to then build 1 metre above it.
1 metre.
Yeah.
And
just to further that, councillors, that it's HAT is kind of like the lowest level. Then there's sea level rise on top of that, plus generally storm surge. So it's not HAT level that is actually the one that you're setting it to. It's just the HAT is the base, and then you've got other provisions on top. Is that?
And that's a coastal. That the HAT is coastal, whereas DFL is flooding, like riverine flooding.
Okay, so different. So would you have an AHD set across the board for that area, or would it obviously depends whether it's coastal flooding or river flooding?
Brad, do you want to?
Yes. So the coastal flooding is relative to the ocean, so you can set a level. Flooding, though, is relative to the surface of the land. So I suppose what I'm trying to do there is say you're at 10 metres AHD, you might be well above coastal flooding, but the flooding from water that falls from the sky is actually going to sit on the surface of the land at 10. So you can have different levels. So it would be, you'd have to have a look at the land surface in terms of both, but you could make a fair and reasonable estimate of where you're sitting based on those two parameters.
And just probably my last question, if Council was to do the overarching flood study, which, Brad, you've already done this site-specific one, the level 3 study, would the overarching study require every individual lot, I guess, to have an individual assessment, or how do you get that, that across the board sort of line how does
Yep.
that work in elsewhere? And I'm sure we'll have a discussion with our planning department to talk how we can work through this. But just
Generally speaking, you do one assessment that, if it was done for a council, would probably be peer reviewed. But once that flood level is set, you can then go into every single lot and set the level on each lot.
So,
If that makes sense, councillor. So you don't need to do an individual assessment on each one, but you can individualise the results so that every landowner would know the level on their lot.
And if I take you back to the QRA mapping, which is very high level, level 1 basin mapping, you can see that the majority of Agnes Water doesn't flood.
Steve,
So-
sorry, Sarah, I think Steve had to add something there for that.
Mr. Mayor, can I ask Brad a question?
For sure, you're part of the deputation, go for it.
It's not on. Is it on?
Hello, testing, yep. Brad, can you hear that? Can you?
Yep.
Yep. Just a question from your experience, the coastal flooding versus the riverine flooding in this situation, the riverine, Round Hill Creek, is tidal, as I understand. Which is likely to be the higher, the coastal hazard or the riverine?
Because you've got 2 metres of additional sort of provision for storm tide, I would suggest along the very coastal edge, it will be the coastal hazard mapping, or the coastal hazard calculation, but further inland, it will be generated by flooding. So, Steve, that's not an easy question to answer easily. Sorry. It's a little bit more complicated than just going, we can just choose this. It's not going to work like that.
Yep. Okay, no, that's all I asked the question. Thank you.
Yeah.
Back to you, Sarah, sorry for that.
No, that's okay. Just taking you back to the QRA mapping, if you did ground truth the extent of the flooding through specific flood studies for the Agnes Creek catchment and the Round Hill catchment, it would be more detailed than this. So a number of properties that are currently covered by the flood hazard investigation area would fall away, and they would not be affected by flood hazard at all, especially those lots up on the 1770 headland. If that floods, we're in a lot of trouble. So they won't have to address the flood hazard overlay code at all, and it would just be the lots that are mapped or still mapped within a defined flood area that would have to go through that flood hazard assessment.
sorry,
good
just
luck, yes.
one more. You mentioned the AHD of, I think it was 7 metres, and then the flood line for that particular case study that we had was 5.6 to 5.8.
Yeah.
So would the study account for that? Obviously, if your AHD was 7 metres, well, that house is out of...
Yeah, so that's the 5.5 metres was specific to that site at Ocean Beach Drive. I believe that 7 metre AHD for the highest astronomical tide was up north further, up near Beaches Village Circuit, where it is like the ground level for lots is higher, so it's at 13 metres or something like that. So you've got quite a large difference in what's actually affected by the CHAS and where the building or the building pad would go in that case. So that's two options. Well, option number 2, rely on the mapping that council has at their availability to reduce the extent of the flood hazard investigation area, not taking away the requirement to do hazard assessments in those areas still mapped as flood affected, but reducing the sheer volume and impact that this issue is having just through the Queensland mapping. And option number 3, for those lots that are still impacted, or if council doesn't feel comfortable using the QRA mapping to reduce the extent of the area, an RPEQ engineer with the expertise in undertaking risk and flood analysis is to certify the actual level of flood risk for the site and measures required to ensure the risks associated with the development can be mitigated to an acceptable or tolerable level. Now that wording comes straight from the acceptable outcomes within the flood hazard overlay code, which is what dwelling houses must comply with in order to be approved by a building certifier and not have to go through a planning assessment with council's planning department. At the moment, we have RPEQ engineers writing flood hazard assessments, certifying that sites don't flood, and because they're not written in accordance with that very detailed policy that is in council's planning scheme policies for flood hazard areas, they're being rejected. Now, I've got 2 examples here in addition to the one that's been rejected by Brad Comley. At this point, Brad's working through to try and resolve that. But Bax Engineering has done a report, and he makes the comment that we have done this and I do not take on the risk of someone's property flooding very lightly. They can certify that the site doesn't risk, and any risk is an acceptable or tolerable level. They're willing to certify their licence that this site doesn't flood. Same with Walsh Consulting Engineers for 36 Beaches Village Circuit. They've gone through the process, and because they haven't done the 1%, 2%, 20% modelling in accordance with that guideline, it's been turned down as not acceptable because it doesn't meet or doesn't cover off everything in the guideline. We're of the opinion that if an RPEQ engineer is willing to certify that something doesn't flood, then it should be accepted. The guideline in the planning scheme policy is a guideline for advice purposes and is not a mandatory requirement within the flood hazard overlay code. So we're not saying that if a flood hazard impacted or flood hazard industry area mapped site doesn't have to go through and should just be able to have an exemption certificate. We acknowledge that that's not an option anymore. But if an RPEQ engineer is willing to certify that a site doesn't flood, then that should be suitable enough for council.
Thanks, Sarah. Is there more for interpretation of that?
I guess, is there anything else you'd like to cover, Fred? I guess one last topic, and I'll say this as a planner who's only ever focused on planning, so I know there's a lot of other things that councils have to take on board. But today's deputation is one example of the consequences of not undertaking regular reviews of your planning scheme. This flood hazard issue or flood study should have been done at some point within the past 8 years, and I say that with all due respect because I understand budgeting and the associated things that go with that. But the planning scheme has a major impact on the success of your urban development and the growth and economic development for your region, and is something that should be reviewed on a regular basis to ensure that it remains in touch with what's happening on the ground. So, respectfully, that's just my last comment.
No, that's fair. We actually, as you know, are starting the process of reviewing
Yeah.
the whole planning scheme. So
I know
I think you were here with us when we did the last one.
Yes, and
We'll have
lots
it
of
back
other
too if you
councils,
don't mind, Steve.
larger councils have their own strategic department that allow for reviews to happen on a regular basis, and I know that that's not always an option for smaller councils, but it's something that I would really like you to think about.
Yeah. All right. So Councillor Churchill first, and then I'll come back to Councillor Goodluck.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mehmet. Just comment and then a couple of quick questions appropriately. But it is quite obvious that you need some clear resolution or clear directive as a priority, and Mehmet's just made reference that we're going to review the planning scheme, and perhaps it's also a wake-up call in relation to the flooding overlay, but today's probably not going to be that decision-making forum, as you'd be well aware, Sarah, from your background. But thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Fred and Brad and Steve. Have we received a copy of that report from Brad? I was trying to find it because I'm trying to get fully informed on it, because having stood there and watched what Brad presented, so are we able to get that?
Well, it's at officer level at the moment, but I'm sure...
It's at officer level, because I think that...
It's provided as part of the lodgement of a planning application,
Okay.
and that's
then.
currently under review.
Well, I'd like to request that we could get a copy of that as well at some stage, if that be permitted through a open and transparent good governance process. So that's... But anyway, you need a clear resolution and a directive as a priority, no doubt, for this part of the region and other parts of our region. I've got 2 questions. I'm not quite sure as to who's going to be able to answer them, but the first one appropriately is you made reference to earlier, Fred, you made reference earlier in relation to building certifications. And I do know from an on-site meeting that I had down in Agnes Water with Gordon Christian just prior to the Heart of Agnes Water AGM that I attended down there, was getting an understanding of what's happening at the grassroots level, is that that the building certifiers that's the private ones, are not certifying any of the development approvals, and nor is council. Is that the case, or is it just for that part of Gladstone region in the Agnes Water 1770, or is it right across the region?
It's for the houses in the flood hazard investigation area where there's no certainty on whether or not the RPEQ certified reports are acceptable to council to say that the site doesn't flood. So your certifiers are not willing to take on the risk that a site doesn't flood because the RPEQ engineer's reports, no one knows whether or not they'd be accepted. So council's got the position now, your planning department has a position that it has to be written in accordance with that guideline to be sufficient. RPEQ engineers are certifying it off under their own modelling and standards that they've gone through to say that a site doesn't flood, but those reports are being rejected and said as insufficient because they don't comply with the guideline. So the certifiers are then saying, well, we don't know whether this report is sufficient or whether it will be accepted. So we don't want to take on the risk that this site does or doesn't flood because we don't know whether council thinks this site doesn't flood. So this is where the issue is. And I guess the guideline is great. It provides a guideline or an advice note to how to address the flood hazard assessment. But to fully comply with that guideline, it's a $15,000 to $30,000 exercise depending on your modelling system. And each homeowner should not have to fork out that kind of money just to build a house, especially when those lots have been approved by council.
Thank you, Sarah, for that professional response. So you're identifying or saying to us that there is a flood investigation risk area in certain parts of the region, but not across the region. Is that the case?
Just in this area mapped at the beginning of May.
Okay then. Yeah, no, I've got copies of the maps and Gordon was good enough to give us some in advance and I think on an email as well. My other question appropriately, and I've raised it a few times in this particular boardroom in relation to the status or the response that you're getting from the insurance industry. Now, I'm not sure whether you can answer that, Sarah, but I would love to hear from someone that, as part of the deputation, that can give an insight on what the insurance industry themselves are saying in relation to the potential for homeowners, albeit investors, to build in relation to the flood identified risk area, if that's possible, please.
No, you have no idea? Okay. I'll take this as a grain of salt because I haven't got specific industry experience in the Agnes region, but I know up north in Far North Queensland where I grew up, cyclones, floodings, all kinds of natural hazards and disasters up there, insurance prices have gone through the roof because the cost to insure your property in a hazard affected area is astronomical. Yeah. The risk of your house being blown away by a cyclone is tenfold up there, so your insurance costs are amplified. Okay,
then you mentioned Far North Queensland, but I'd like to get it localised a little bit because I do know that the insurance, from my own personal understanding and background in the building industry, is that some insurance companies are just refusing to insure unless you've got the official stamp or the official...
If you're in a hazard affected area, it's either extremely expensive or you can't be insured, and I assume that would be the same anywhere in Queensland.
All right, another unnecessary impact. Thank you.
Councillor Goodluck.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Sarah, and Steve and Fred and Brad. It's good to have this discussion and you've got some good options there. Brad, just if we were to look at doing an overarching flood study, the type that's been referenced in the presentation, what sort of time frame off the top of your head would you be looking at to get something like that completed, just for reference?
I thought you'd ask that question and then the cost, which is it's hard to answer in some ways, councillors. The reason is, and it's about risk. The cost and the time becomes about risk for us. A single house like we've looked at on that site where we know it's a metre and a half above the very conservative limits of flooding, that becomes less risk for us. To prepare a flood study for a whole community and make sure that that has been double checked, triple checked, and so on and so forth, because there's a lot of risk in that. That becomes a longer period of reporting, but to try and give you an idea, the modelling would be in the vicinity of a month. Then you may want someone to check that. So it's not a very massive, extensive period of time. If you're councillors, it's within a month, 4 weeks worth of work. The cost again then becomes from a flood engineering perspective, what appetite does that consultancy have to that risk? I hope that answers the question in a roundabout way, councillor.
Yes,
Thank you. Yeah, and we also have our own process that we would have to go through in terms of calling expressions of interest for that. We just can't pick one, even though, Brad, it sounds like you know what you're doing. So
No, totally
you
understand.
may have those qualifications that are pretty necessary for this area. Councillors, further questions? Thank you, Councillor Cameron. You lived and breathed this industry for a while. Tell us.
Oh, just a little bit, yeah. Yeah, thanks, Brad. That very extensive report and, great information in there. It would be nice if we could just get one generic reduced level for a finished floor level of a building and lay that over the whole thing, and it'll make it quite easy. But what can we do to free these blocks up? If you look at this Beaches Village circuit there, and there's been 50-odd dwellings been built in there, there's never been any inundation of flooding, whether riverine or coastal, in that area at all, has there? Can anybody give us an idea of that?
Well, when the applications were assessed, it was never highlighted that there was a flood risk.
Well, we never had a flood mapping done, and that was the issue. It was never done initially.
But if there was a risk, if council believed there was a risk at the time of that assessment, a site-specific flood hazard assessment would have been requested.
Yeah.
And the fact that it wasn't, and those 53 lots have been brought online.
But they've never been inundated, that's what I'm saying.
Not in my knowledge, but I've only been here for 10 years, so. Fred?
Yeah, councillor, if I can try and add a little bit of context to that. We deal with a lot of clients, a lot of people, a lot of instances where people say, I've never been flooded, and I totally understand that. The modelling that we do is of a design event, which may be somewhat different to an actual event, obviously. That a design event is a theoretical event. It adds, like I said, 20% extra rainfall. It adds a conservative tailwater. So it may be the case that when we model a design event that councils agree is the minimum that we have to, it may not represent what actually has happened recently in the past. The other thing is a 1% AEP is the new terminology, but it's sort of similar to an old Q100 terminology. But the correct terminology of a 1% AEP is a storm that has a probability of occurring 1% in every 1 year. So it's a very large event that happens very infrequently, but doesn't mean it can't happen 4 years in a row.
Okay, I'm just looking at this Beaches Village circuit there. Is that the situation of this subdivision as we see it today, with all these vacant lots here?
Yes.
How hard would it be to get a generic reduced level suitable for all that area there to free all that up?
You'd have to do a flood study for that entire Round Hill Creek catchment.
And how quickly could we do that?
As Brad just outlined,
About a
it's
month-
around
about a
4
month.
weeks plus council's process for tender.
So we can get all this land freed up in a month. if we
You
could.
would get the entire catchment freed up in a month if you did the flood study.
Okay.
Let's go a bit more than a month because you've got process and everything, but yeah. Yes.
Sorry, Brad.
Well, how long have we been held up now? What are we talking? Weeks, months, years?
Months.
Months.
And I'll take you back to the AO in the Flood Hazard Overlay Code. Previously, council was using their discretion through the issue of exemption certificates, understanding that that's not the due process and is unlawful, as I will agree with Tegan. But you can provide your discretion. The clause allows you to provide your discretion. So if you find that you're confident based on the QRA mapping, the CHAS mapping, historical events, the fact that the Beaches Village Circuit Precinct specifically has been recently approved and subdivided under the life of this planning scheme, you could issue your discretion in some other form to say that development in the Beaches Village precinct was free to proceed.
Yeah, well, that's where I'm driving, where we can get this stuff freed up quickly. If we could get a sensible generic reduced level over like a subdivision area like that, that could free things up quickly, couldn't it?
Thank you. Yeah, Steve?
Microphone.
Sorry, just in terms of the Beaches Village precinct, look, my view is that the risk of flooding there is very low. A lot of that land's at around 12 to 14 metres AHD, I think, Sarah. It's been filled. If you actually look at it in context with North Break behind there, Dan Murphy, I think, filled that land when he actually did that subdivision. So if you look at the existing AHD levels versus the CHAS levels, the coastal hazard mapping, which council's done, which is about 5 to 7 metres, I think, you're talking sort of 7 metres coastal hazard flooding versus the land's at 10 to 14 metres, say, through that area. I think the risk is fairly low, but that's a decision for council whether they want to adopt that risk.
Yeah. Thanks. Councillor O'Grady? Oh, sorry. Councillor O'Grady, then back to you, Sarah.
Sorry, I just asked a question. So down Waterfront Drive, that would be lower than this, what you're talking about, isn't it? It's closer to Agnes. Yeah. I would say.
It is slightly lower, yeah.
It is slightly lower, so and there's houses all along there.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I think if I've just shared a screen again of the Greater Agnes flood model results.
Just wait, Brad.
I'll just bring that up on the screen, Brad.
Yeah.
Oh, can we make that any bigger?
I can try.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
So that, I don't know if that answers everyone's questions, but that's, if you find the right consultant through your process and they spend a month modelling and get it checked, you'll get something like that. From that, you could put a flood level on every lot.
Thanks, Brad. That's handy. Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Goodluck, and then Councillor Churchill. Oh, no, you're right. Just Councillor Goodluck.
Thanks, Sarah, again. But, you know, I know this is a frustration. We can appreciate it. We've had conversations and talked to a number of people about it as well. There has been examples across the nation where we've seen houses approved in places that weren't considered with the flood impact. So I think from a council perspective and from a broader community perspective, we don't want to see that. Obviously, this policy change, we haven't got the balance right. So thank you again for coming to have this discussion so we can try and get that balance right. I think you've given us a number of options which we'll be able to consider. It might be a combination of approaches that we might be able to take, but we'll certainly take that into consideration, and it's in our interest to get things moving for you guys as well, but in everybody's interest to make sure we do it in a way that we don't have people building houses, moving into the houses and being flooded in 12 months' time. And I know some of those places probably not likely to happen, but we'll definitely take that on board. Thank you.
Especially the headland.
Exactly. Oh, not on the headland.
Councillor Churchill, you're happy to move?
Yeah, happy to move that the deputation from Zone Planning on behalf of the Agnes Water Development Industry be noted and received today, please.
Thank you. Can I have a seconder, Councillor O'Grady? I'll put that motion. All in favour? Motion's carried. Thank you, Sarah, obviously, and thank you, Councillor Branthwaite. As Councillor Goodluck said, you provided good solutions, or alternative solutions, and we'll have those conversations with our planners. It's very handy that the General Manager of Town Planning is also acting CEO today. So never a better time than to have that conversation. Thank you, and thank you, Rob, and thank you for those in the gallery for your attendance as well this morning. All right, councillors, we don't have a very big agenda for the rest of the day, so if the gallery are bored and want to hang around, we'll break for morning tea in about 20 minutes, half an hour maybe. But I understand if you don't want to stay for the rest of the council meeting, it's not that much. All right, councillors, the next item on the agenda is the officers' reports, and the next officers' report is G 4.1, the monthly financial report for the period ending the 31st of August 2023. And I'll hand over to the General Manager of Finance, Governance and Risk, Mark Holmes. Thank you, Mark.
Morning, Mayor. Morning, councillors. This item is your monthly financial statements for the period ended 31 August 2023. Certainly are in that infancy period of the financial year, and we are seeing our revenue slightly behind expenditure at this point of the year, which is not unusual given that we do receive our revenue in a lot of essentially lump sums, particularly with those one-off payments that we receive for grants, dividends, tax equivalents and the like. So essentially you're seeing your overall revenue at 12% as compared to a pro rata of around about 17%. With respect to our expenditure, that is very much in line with expectations at this point. Again, it's slightly ahead of income. Those that are cyclical and those that happen on a fortnightly basis are very much in line with pro rata and where we would expect it to be. But there are some one-off items there that are a little bit over budget at this point in time, particularly with respect to some of those donations and the like, which generally we get those out the door early in the financial year. With respect to our capital works, progressing a little bit slower at the moment, but we've only recently just let our roads tender, which should help correct that. So we're sitting at $7.8 million out of a $68 million budget as at the end of August in terms of expenditure. With respect to outstanding rates, sitting at 2.21% of the 22-23 levy remaining outstanding. We've got one more month left of reporting against that levy before we start reporting on the current year. But certainly that is ahead of where we were at the same time last year. With respect to our indicators, again, put out there under the new sustainability framework. They are where we would expect them to be at this point, and there's a new table attached to your report that explains each of those. But happy to take relevant questions.
Thanks, Mark. Questions to General Manager, please. Councillor Churchill.
Well, I had one that perhaps Mark might be able to, was the Miriamvale Community Centre upgrade funding project. And maybe it's an operational issue through the acting CEO, but I was just trying to get an understanding of, and I've had people asking, because obviously we're forging ahead with it as such, timeline, and what's the strategy in relation to the closure of the building, and for what period of time where can the other activities go? You know, is there a plan?
I don't know if that's a Mark question for
Yeah,
Mark.
actually, happy to take
No,
that.
it's not. No, I said right from the beginning that it's more an operational matter. But if you,
Well, for the
Happy to
right
answer that.
General
I'm the
Manager.
project sponsor for that,
Oh,
so
okay.
that is a
and that's the reason why I asked it.
We've called tenders, I know that much.
Yeah, okay then.
Yeah, so we're about to go to market exactly for that, and we just have, with respect, and so we'll probably get an idea with respect to periods of closure with respect to that.
Thank you.
We do have some very tight deadlines with respect to funding with respect to that building, because essentially it was received out of the Black Summers bushfire funding. That has a very hard deadline of 31 March 24, so we really are trying to get that project out to market and let as quick as possible.
So the intent also, even though it is a financial report, was the aspect in relation to community consultation because of the timeline, because as we all know, the Miriamvale Community Centre is used as a site in relation to disasters. So, you know, we're heading into, as you know, as the coordinator of the LDMG, we're heading into that area. So it's all about the timing of the project to make sure that we don't end up not having a facility if we have a disaster as well.
Yeah, we'll just have, and like any other issue when a disaster arises, we'll have to look at what facilities we have available at that time. So touch wood, we don't have one of those, but certainly we're making every effort to make sure that we achieve that funding deadline for that project.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Councillor Branthwaite, online question.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just turn my little thing off here. I've actually got two questions. The first one is the overdue rates side of things. Mark, do you have any idea of the total of overdue rates over the course of the whole graph there?
Yep, so essentially that's just over 4.1 million in outstanding rates.
So the process that we're about to come into now with those ones that are over 3 years, what's the process with that, as far as notifications and of final payments, or resuming properties or auctions or whatever?
We'll start our normal debt collection process and essentially debt recovery procedures. We'll start those generally about 30 days after discount. So discount is in and around mid-October. So once we'll generally late November we'll start looking at sending notices out, and then early in the new year is when we'll take some of those more formal actions.
And that's for people who haven't paid a dollar on their rates in 3 years.
But generally what we do encourage is people in the interim making contact with council, making contact with our revenue team to put in place essentially arrangements where we need to.
Yeah, and our finance team have amazing opportunities for people to be able to pay them off over, instalments and all the rest of it.
These are very overdue rates, though, mind you, Mr. Mayor. So, there's probably been lots of notices go out. So, the other question I have, it's more of just an observation. I'm looking at your capital works with the bonsai house. It's $1.8 million. Now we're getting obviously utilities put into this bonsai house. Are we? Are we gold-plated piping, or what's your?
I have to defer to, I know it's a project that's under our Works for Queensland piece, and they're looking at how we deliver that.
It's got a grant.
But Kylie's
connected
online,
to it.
might be able to
just remember, we've got to get power and we've got to get water to it.
So. Oh, no, I fully realise that. We're talking $1.8 million, so it's a lot of money.
Well, we got Kylie on leave. Kylie online.
Thanks, Kylie.
Kylie Lee online. Thank you, Kylie.
Kylie not on leave. Thank you, Councillor Branthwaite, for the question. It is an expensive job, but that's what services cost. So it's exactly what Councillor Hanson said. It's the sewerage network, it's the water network, and some road network. So that's where the $1.8 million is coming from.
Oh, right. So it's a road network as well, and electrical and plumbing. And,
electrical, yep.
Yeah, well, sort of, and roadwork, so it probably makes a bit of sense too. Okay, no, thanks very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
That's okay.
Also a car park as well, and they're not cheap either, so yeah, that's a fair bit involved, and it's been a project long time coming.
But did it attract some funding, Kylie?
Yes, Works for Queensland
funding. It had funding, yep.
Oh, cool. Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
We love these projects that are funded by the state and feds and industry as well. Councillors, further questions? No? All right, I'll have a mover for the officers' report, please. Thank you, Councillor Cameron. Second, Councillor Goodluck. All in favour? That's carried. Thank you, Mark. The next item on the agenda is G4.2, which is a sole supplier from Interventions Plus. And it's back to you, Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This item was with respect to essentially a specialised supplier that was seeking to support our community development team, just in outworking a grant opportunity that they have. So it has been identified in line with the work that has been done through our high schools and others, that this is really probably the only supplier that can reasonably perform that work, and on that basis it's recommended that we essentially seek the resolution of council to award this sole supplier.
Thank you. Councillors, any questions? No? Have a mover, please. Thank you, Councillor Hanson. Second, Councillor O'Grady. Sorry, Councillor Trevor, next time. All in favour? That's carried. That was a very easy one. Okay, G4.3 is our tender for tyres and associated services. Hand back to you, Mark, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This item is with respect to a preferred supplier arrangement that we've gone to market for the provision of tyres and associated services. And the recommendation is to proceed with the allowing of the PSA to Bridgestone Australia.
You got a question, or are you moving?
No, happy to move.
Can I ask a question first? Yep. The number of car tyre companies in town, and Bridgestone are very good, I know them very well. Why only one? Why would we not tyres, especially when it comes to our passenger vehicle tyres or our SUVs or our utilities? A preferred supplier, more often than not, we have more than one for our officers to pick from. Why are we just choosing one?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Mayor. We've actually got Cameron Shearer, who is our Acting Manager of Operation Support Services, online. He will be able to answer that for you.
Thanks, Cameron. Over to you. Oh, is he frozen? There he is. Sorry, Cameron, we might get you to start again. We got you now.
Got you, mate.
Thanks for the question. So there's a few benefits of having a single supplier and on a contract. The biggest one is the reduction in time it takes for the workshop team in particular to be able to facilitate repairs and replacement of tyres. The big factor here is we're averaging over one engagement a day for our tyre supplier at the moment. looking at the future.
Sorry, Cameron, we've lost you again, and I need that question answered before I'm comfortable.
The reality was, I believe we only did receive the one response to this offer. That's what it says there. So that was, so when there's a confidential attachment that looks at that evaluation.
Well, I'm trying to open the confidential attachment and I can't.
We did go to the market on this, and we did only receive the one response, which to me was actually a little bit disappointing. I would have expected to receive more. I believe Christie's team have reached out to get some feedback from others. Those that didn't supply a response, and there's various reasons for each of those suppliers. But in this case, we've gone out to the market and we have only received one response. So that doesn't say, so a PSA puts that, it's exactly as it is, it's a preferred supplier. So with, what we're looking at is trying to make it easy for our team to engage, for what would be most of our engagements, not recognise that there may be times where they need to engage with the broader market, and that this doesn't stop that, doesn't preclude that. It's just saying that this makes it easier for those times when the workshop team needs to go to the market. So the majority of those applications will be through the PSA.
Yeah, don't get me wrong, I know Bridgestone very well, and they're a great company, and it's great to see that you're buying them locally, because a few years back we weren't. So it's good to see that we're getting them through a local company. I'm surprised that others didn't put in, considering there's another two on the same street and another one in the valley that I would have thought, and one out at Calamonda that I thought would have wanting to put in tenders as well.
Quite surprised.
Cameron, do we get a better financial deal, or is it just more convenient for our staff and easier for programming the scheduling of this maintenance or the servicing? Or do we actually get a better price for the tyres? I can see now the confidential report. I've got it. Thank you, Rachel, for opening it. I see the bill. It's a lot. Is that a discounted price because we're going to buy so many? Right, not your fault, Cameron, it's technology.
So bear in mind that commercial assessments was based on a number of, essentially just a little bit of assessment of our current activity over the life of what might be the contract. So there's no guarantee of that, but essentially just, I know how to look at the last 6 months, we've had 160 engagements for tyre purchases over that period of time, and that's cost us around about $130,000. So just to give you an idea of spend.
I think that is
so this is we are looking at a multi-year engagement here, though.
Yeah. All right. Thanks. Any further questions, councillors? Can I have a mover for the officer's report? Oh, Councillor Churchill, you did move it already. Thank you. And secondly, Councillor Hanson. I'll put the motion. All in favour? That's carried. Thanks, Cameron. Sorry about the technical issue there with our IT in the room. Okay. Councillors, the next item on the agenda, and thank you, team, is our councillor reports. Is there no written councillor reports? Is there any verbal councillor reports?
Just wanted to make a brief one, if you wouldn't mind me, Matt.
Absolutely.
Some of us attended the Boyne-Tannum hookup AGM recently, so just to note that there is new leadership there from the AGM. Congratulations, Karen Windrus is the new president, and be it the executive have filled positions, but there's still a media marketing coordinator and a general committee member, if you know of anybody that's interested in going into the Boyne-Tannum hookup committee. There's a couple of positions still available. And last but not least, just to note that next year will be the 29th, and 2025, noted in your diary, will be their 30-year celebration. That's obviously going to be a big one.
Thank you.
Like it is every year. They're all big ones, but 30-year. And just, I suppose, just quickly, some of the stats, and they have got highlights. It's been produced, and I think it's absolutely terrific that these highlights are well and truly acknowledged and identified from 2023. 3,362 participants, 844 junior participants, and 1.9 million tourist dollars injected into the Gladstone region, and the list goes on, which clearly indicates that the Boyne-Tannum hookup is the biggest and largest family fish. What do you say? The family-friendly fishing competition in all of the world.
In all of the world.
Thank you.
Who would have thought?
Speaking of the Boyne-Tannum hookup, Councillor Branthwaite was involved from the very beginning. You had a question, Councillor Branthwaite.
Stood the test of time.
A councillor report.
I did actually. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, it was just a couple of weeks ago. There was the mayor and myself and Councillor Muscat we actually attended the Local Roads Transport Infrastructure Congress in Canberra. Now, we heard lots of new developments, lots of new thinking, especially the impacts that obviously heavy transport is having on local roads, and the cost sharing that was seen even here with fixing that bridge on, or some of the funding to fix the bridge on Red Rover Road. And this sort of thing is happening right across the likes of Australia in local government areas. But there's the managing and building infrastructure and fires and whatnot. Look, there was also a lot of talk around community batteries. As the mayor, he actually wants one now, so I've got no doubt you're going to hear about this, because this is a really groundbreaking stuff. And community batteries is certainly some way of going about things. There's the likes of the agri-business side of things with different farmers and different methods of farming that are impacting the creeks and whatnot in the environment, and also the roads. And we're about to see that very soon with, I suppose, there's a lot of transport and local roads being used for our solar farms and whatnot. So there's a lot of things going on and a lot of talk in the background. So this actual Congress was really highly valued by myself, and I think the mayor actually presented twice at it, and which was very well received. A lot of eyes on what's happening in Gladstone. And a lot of the time, Gladstone is actually leading the way in a lot of these things. And when they were presenting them, going, we're actually doing that already. But there was other little things in amongst that made a lot of sense, and a lot of new ideas. So we've been jotting those things down as we went through the Congress. So no, it was a very successful Congress, and I really appreciated being able to attend and look on the bigger picture stuff. Thank you.
Just a quick question, Councillor, you remember. Councillor Branthwaite, so you say we're leading the way on many of these things in roads and bridges and footpaths and missing links and everything else. Any chance we could ever host the conference here in Gladstone?
Actually, that's possible now.
Sorry,
it's possible now.
It used to be held in alternate places.
Yeah, so I know it's a jab, but it's a good jab because obviously, as councillors are aware, I'm the Vice President of the Local Government Association of Australia, and our a decision a couple of years ago was to host the conference permanently in Canberra, which I didn't support, no offence to my fellow board members, but it was mentioned on many occasions at the Congress that it should rotate again. So I'll be taking it to the next board meeting that we at least rotate it every second year. So maybe they can go to Canberra every other year and then take it back to the regions every year after that.
That's great to hear. We've still got a motion on the books, I think.
So now we might be able to put a bid in to host it and bring all the councillors from around the country, not just the councillors from around Queensland, which will be here shortly.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Branthwaite. Our Priceless Pass was launched just recently, and I know there was a few councillors in the room that attended. It's still on still on exhibition right now at our Gladstone Regional Art Gallery Museum. And maybe one of the councillors who attended might be able to mention the launch. Or
Councillor Churchill was the chair at that meeting, so it's probably...
Okay. Well, back to you, Churchy, then.
Best if he does that.
Sorry, back to you, Councillor Churchill.
Well, yeah, thank you for that. But briefly, I mean, Councillor O'Grady, Councillor Cameron and Councillor Hanson, we were all there. It was a good gathering, and well done to the Gladstone Region Art Gallery and Museum. Congratulations to them for professional presentation, to the seniors who have actively participated, to the Calliope State High School students, and it's wonderful that the Calliope State High School have now participated in it, and it's terrific that we take it right around the region, and we're looking for volunteers and victims for next year's Our Priceless Pass. So if you're in that age group or you know someone that's in that particular category, but overall, Our Priceless Pass, I think it started in 1998, 1999, which was the year of the seniors, has now stood the test of the time, and I think we've got well over 350 of our regional seniors that are highlighted. So it's recorded in history now, and I have no doubts that will continue, and hopefully some around the table might consider participating in that in the future.
certainly is fantastic to document our seniors and our local pioneers that have been in our region for so long in such a, and including with the students, because they learn so much about it on the way through. It's one of my favourite exhibitions at our gallery. Any further councillor reports?
Can I just jump
Councillor
in talking
Grady,
about the art gallery?
Yes.
Also, we've got Marty Hanson Awards coming up. So I think at the first week in October that everybody has to put their entries in. So yeah, I've been trying to encourage some artists in the region to put some entries in. So I think it'll be great again this year. Thanks.
Yeah. It's later in October, but you're right, they do accepting entries
the entries
first week.
close early in October,
Yes, early
as
October,
council said.
Okay.
But everybody's, I think, in the art world has got their eye on that anyway,
Yeah.
I believe, so I hope they have anyway.
Well, right around the state, it's a big one. It's one of the best art competitions in the state, if not the nation. Okay, councillors, no further councillor reports. There's no urgent business. There's no notice of motion, no confidential items. Declare the meeting closed at 10:25 a.m. Thank you.